Hello everyone. Today we're going back to the historical World Championship match series. Last time we did game number 12 of the Steinitz Zukertort, and today we're going to do game number 13. So before this game, Steinitz is already leading in the match. This is the last leg of the match, which happens in New Orleans. Having read a small bit of biography from both players, I would say, especially given the disastrous result that Zukertort had in this particular leg of the tournament, where 13th game was the last game he won in the match, followed by the incredible 4 losses later, and making this last win for Zukertort. I would just dare say and kind of guess that New Orleans is very famous for being a party town, right? And we know that in their upbringing and because of their lifestyles, these two great chess players, I would say that having a match in New Orleans was not a great idea for Zukertort. I mean, the guy was famous for being a sportsman, playwright, linguist, author of different treatises. He was an MD as well, right? So the guy was pretty famous. So I'm sure it was very difficult for him to restrict himself to a strict World Championship regimen, and that would definitely play a role. Without further ado, let's go to the game 13th. Zukertort is playing white. So he opens the game with d4, and we enter the Queen's Gambit opening with the bishop on f4, which was slightly unusual. I mean, many decades later, we'll see classical matches between Karpov and Kasparov going to knight f3 into the main line of Queen's Gambit decline. But bishop f4 at the time was almost a century earlier, so it was not that developed yet. So bishop f4 looks reasonable, c5, and there were some notes, previous notes to this game made by some other grandmasters over the years, including the players themselves, the contemporaries of the players, right? So the knight b5 was considered to be a mistake because of this, and if knight c7 check, then queen c7, bishop b4 check, black recaptures the queen, and he has extra material. So one of the ways for white to try to avoid is by playing queen a2, queen a4 with the tempo, right? He's taking b4 square away from black's bishop, and he threatens knight c7. However, after bishop d7, black is winning because that knight on b5 is now pinned. So early knight overtures like knight b5 is considered anti-positional. However, these moves were seriously considered at the time. In the modern chess, such a move would not be considered unless you have been confirmed with a huge line of analysis with your computer. And as usual, we have now Stockfish 8, the free version of the program, helping us analyze this game. So you guys can see which lines we're going to go over with and which lines the computer thinks are reasonable. So e3, I think, is a fine move. It allows black, though, to take on d4 now and create this isolated pawn position. So again, this match have happened such a long time ago, it's really hard to comprehend that these positions have been already played way back then. I mean, a lot of young players, especially attacking style guys, they like to play this isolated queen-pawn position for several reasons. It allows white to have more space for the maneuvering of his pieces, also potential attack via bishop d3, for example, then knight f3, castles, and then going for the straightforward attack on the black king, which is going to hide on the king side. So let's see what happened. Black takes on c4. He goes into this position. Bishop takes c4. I have to mention that in this position, black, it's modern treatment, but black sometimes plays bishop e7 and avoids taking on c4 until white develops his bishop first. For example, knight f3, then castles, and after white plays bishop d3, then black takes on c4, therefore winning a tempo. But that nuance came much later, much later with the theory development. So take on c4, bishop c4, knight c6, pretty standard. Although black also been known to develop his knight via knight d7, knight b6, followed by knight d5 later. But that's much later. Knight c6 seems to be a very natural development, so we're gonna say much about that. Bishop e7, and of course the computer nowadays he likes really the bishop d6 move because he really likes to get this white bishop from f4 square, where it's more or less ideally placed, taking a lot of squares, like square c7, very important square from the queen. Also he supports square e5. So bishop d6 is modern treatment because the exchange of the pieces favors black, as any piece exchange diminishes white's attacking potential and also helps black later to focus on this weakness on d4. And if white refuses, then he'll have to play something like bishop g5, but then, for example, even here, and castles, or I would say even now bishop e7 is probably a good idea. Still, it's a huge complex game. It's a fair choice between bishop e7 and bishop d6, but bishop d6 looks normal. So castles, rook e1, pretty standard. Again, it is very typical for white in such positions to play a3. The idea is to prevent black's knight on c6 going to b4 and later to d5. To block the central opponent d4, Elia Nimzovich, who of course came much later, and developed his famous Nimzovich system, right, My System book, where he speaks quite a lot about such structures. And white's idea with a3 is to prophylaxis against exactly such knight maneuver, and that leaves black's knight on c6 highly restricted, and the only choice probably for black would be to play somewhere bishop d6, and if knight e5, for example, knight e7, right? So that way knight can reroute to d5. But now that leaves white with a lot of tempies, because black spends a lot of time with his knight. So in the game, rook e1, not bad. Bishop d7 is normal move. I would say a lot of modern grandmasters play b6 here, and using the fact that if white plays d5 too early, he'll be facing knight a5, retreat with the tempo, and for example, bishop d3, he takes d5, and we'll have a lot of complications here arising after knight b5, where I believe that white will have compensation for his pawn, but whether he'll have more, it's not clear. There is such thing as taking on e6, of course, as we can see the computer shows, but again, usually in these lines, when white gives up his light squared bishop, there is a little he can hope for in terms of the advantage, and we can see the first line here gives white the equality, and the rest of the lines give black some sort of an advantage, and it's obvious that if black manages to keep his pair of bishops, he is actually having better prospects for the future game. So again, a3 would be then a very normal move to play, followed by the standard bishop a2, and for example queen d3, let's say bishop f8, rook d1, and the most standard idea for white in the structure is to prepare this break d4, d5. This is very standard break, after which if white manages to do it, then white will get a huge advantage because all his pieces are sort of are located on more active squares, and as you can see the evaluation here, also the bishop is ready to go to b1, which will also help with this battery, the famous battery on the king side attack, and already according to the computer white is having quite a large pressure. So we see the first line being h6, say bishop b1, probably a great idea, although you can start with 95, but I like bishop b1 personally, especially after pawn being on h6, 95, and if knight f5, now black will have to contend with g4, simply going for this position. So I would say that black is in serious trouble now. So that bishop e7 knight c6 development for black Black doesn't do it in this way. Black usually plays something like queen moves somewhere with d8 and then bishop d7, bishop e8. So let's see what happened in the game. Because at knight b4, then knight e5, and again, this is the normal transposition. And in such structures, black's bishop on d7, he is particularly weak, given that the pawns on b7, d5, and f7 are located on the white squares. He has no room to play. White immediately attacks the d5 and b7 pawn. Knight on e5 is highly superior to this bishop. And again, going back to the Kasparov-Karpov matches, we have seen some games where these gentlemen played this sort of position minus the dark squared bishops, in which case white's advantage would be even larger. So after queen b3, bishop c6 is more or less forced, then rook c1, and if bishop f6, for example, then we transpose into this position where white's more active rooks, better bishop, and slightly better pawn structure, because two pawns are on the far side versus one, and together with the white's bishop on f4, potentially these pawns will create a huge threat by just pushing forward. So this position is slightly black. So as typical, if black develops the knight on c6, again I would just say that black is just stuck with a slightly worse position. So let's see what Steinitz does. He plays bishop d7. Now Zukertort played queen e2, normal move. He gets the rooks together, prepares rook a d1. However, just having said all the above, you guys probably realized that a3 was now probably a better move, to prevent that knight b4 coming again, and preparing for the queen to go to d3, which is better location than on e2. Because on d3, it's already on the third rank. It can sometimes switch directly to the kingside attack via queen d3, then queen h3, right, hitting that pawn on h7, combined with the bishop on a2 going to b1, and also hitting that pawn. So, but okay, queen e2 is also played quite often, this type of positions. Queen a5, black preparing to move his rooks to d8. So, black is playing quite modern approach, dealing with white isolated pawn. Knight b5, and here's knight b5, which is exactly, which was a slight mistake, because white's game is really centered around the d4, d5 break, as we mentioned previously, right? And knight b, and on the king side, the attack on the king side. So knight b5 was quite waste. So let's see, rook a d1, so we're probably looking at rook d8. In fact, this is not the greatest move. The computer says that bishop b4 must be played because white is already threatening d5. So a3 first, therefore, preparing this rook d1, d5 break would probably be better. But let's see the danger behind allowing white's d5, right? I mean, the lines are very complex, very tactical. I mean, you can feel naturally that there should be something here, especially after this move. So take, rook d5. The queen has to go to a4 probably, because if it goes to b6 and rook b5, and black is stuck with the terrible queen. Knight d4 tactically is impossible because of this move, and then white just takes on b6, takes on e2, takes on e7, having two minor pieces. So if black plays queen a4, then we have situation where white just can play knight g5 with the idea of bishop g5, rook d7. And there is a huge threat of rook d8, queen e8 checkmate, so black doesn't have time to capture white's bishop on f4, and he has to protect against rook d8, queen e8, as well as bishop g5 and bishop f7. So black is lost here, and white just have to be careful, and he have to find this series of moves, simple moves, where he is having a huge material advantage, winning with two bishops and a pawn versus rook. So d5 is therefore extremely dangerous, and black must not allow that. So in the game, knight b5 was played, and as I mentioned before, this is not the right approach for white, because he's trying to do everything. He's trying to be present in the center. He's trying to dominate black's queen on a5. He's trying to say, I have an advantage all over the board, including the queen side. However, that is not the case, because in a series of moves, white actually helps black to play a6, b5, including a6, b5 is actually very good for black, because those pawns, they get space, and eventually they'll be able to play b4, and white's knight on c3, which is ideally posed, he will lose that support square. So bishop c7, going for the tactics. However, there is nothing special for white here. Knight c3, rook fc8. I was slightly surprised about this. I mean, rook ac8 looked pretty normal, right? And followed by b5, and I would say black is okay here. So Steinitz plays rook fc8. He probably tries to keep his rook on a8 guarding that pawn on a6. However, I don't think it was really that necessary. The ideal location for the rook was on d8 and on c8, and these two rooks are probably optimally placed on these positions. So bishop f4, the computer mentions bishop e5, bishop g3, but I think bishop f4. The only minus of bishop f4 is that sometimes if black manages to put his knight on d5, that bishop will be attacked, right? So that will give black sort of a tempo. But it's not so clear if it is such a great deal. So b5, very natural move. Bishop b4, because if bishop goes here, then as we mentioned before, that knight goes with the tempo. Bishop e4, and we have the standard position here. Very standard structure, very standard piece placement by both sides. And according to the computer and based on some practice games in modern times, I would say that white has enough compensation for having a weakness on d4. He has a great piece activity followed by some possibilities to create attacking chances on the king side. So this is basically equal, a dynamic equilibrium. Which is why Zukertort plays bishop b3. He doesn't want to allow black to gain any tempos, and he is now realizing that he probably have to play d5 some point, or basically he wants to keep the bishop on b3 in case of the future knight f3, e5, and knight f7. So basically along this diagonal, right? So that bishop is very actively placed. So black plays queen b6. And of course the computer likes b4 move very much, because if knight e4, then queen f5, attacking both knight and bishop, forcing white to exchange on f6, which brings black to his goal of exchanging more pieces and leaving white with a bad structure, isolate pawn on d4, because in the endgame that pawn on d4 will be very weak and will allow black to play for an advantage. So, however, if the knight goes to a4, which is a better idea, because now the knight can gain access to the c5 square, and this seems reasonable. Knight d8, attacking this knight. Black tries to get this pawn, so he wins this pawn, but white gets pair of bishops. So again, this becomes sort of equal position. So knight d5, knight c6, and black's extra pawn is being compensated by very powerful bishops. Open position. I would say white has nothing more than that, because black has no weaknesses. Eventually he'll have to give up one of his bishops to regain that material balance. So again, dynamic equilibrium. Instead, Steinitz plays queen b6, and he ignores white's d5 move, which is pretty incredible. In the game he played knight d1 and gave Zukertort played rook d1 and gave black an important tempo, knight a5. But he could have played d5 here immediately, and black has to take on d5, otherwise he just suffers loss of a pawn. He was probably worried about something like bishop a3, however after knight d1, bishop has to go back and white has simply an extra pawn. It's a very healthy pawn, and becomes a technical win, which given Zukertort, now that we know he played endgame really well, despite having a reputation that Steinitz had this huge positional superiority over Zukertort, I have to disagree with that view. Even though it's pretty common, I have to say that based on the way Zukertort outplayed Steinitz early in the endgames and his mastery of the endgames in general, the mastery of endgames is very related to positional understanding, right? And so having seen those factors, how Zukertort plays the endgames, I must say that the Zukertort really did not feel inferior in the positional sense. I would suggest that he probably saw that stuff, but the romantic era played its part. It's like the being gentleman, again, like in swordsmanship, right, of which Zukertort was the master. There was some sense of what's being fair, right, of being fair to both you and to your opponent, so that means playing by the certain set of rules, and having this sort of gentlemanly romantic rules, I would say, played a role in Zukertort making certain decisions in chess game. So, much harder question, of course, is how white gets advantage if black simply takes on d5. And let's play, for example, rook e8 because of bishop f6 and rook d8. And the threat is bishop f7, followed by rook d7. And if black plays rook d8, for example, now bishop f7 anyway, right, because of queen e6 check. With a winning position. So black probably has to play bishop g4, and after h3, bishop takes f3 because of bishop h5. Then you also have g4 and g5, and black king is seriously under attack. Right, he has to give up the piece at this point by playing bishop here, queen c6, queen e7, queen f3. So knight e5 first, but after knight g6, white just has an extra piece. So it is incredible, really, to see why a player of such strength as Zukertort didn't play d5. I would think that he thought that after rook e8, black is slightly passive, but he didn't see the win, the direct win, how to play further. Because if white does not play very concretely, and precisely, black simply plays bishop f6, and rook d8, and just goes for massive exchanges, leading to a position which will become very equal. However, it's only later that, of course, in the modern times, that it is understood how this type of positions are very dangerous for black. And here comes a very computer move, because if you play normally like rook a d1, then bishop f6 is impossible, right? So queen a7. And it is not clear how white can further improve. So just one move, inaccurate move, and black is out of the dangerous waters. So the correct move here is to play rook e d1, and if rook a d1, then the other rook goes to c1. The knight is pinned because of bishop c7, right? Bishop c7 here. So black plays bishop f6. However, after bishop e3, black queen is forced to go into one of the several pins based on the knight c6, right? So it's either bishop d5, this a8 diagonal pin, or it's either rook c1, c7 pin. So black probably has to play queen c7, and now we have rook c5, rook c2, rook c8, and there is this absolutely incredible move. h4, of course, is very possible with the idea of knight g5, because black is simply paralyzed, but I kind of like rook d2 move. The idea is to play queen d1, white places his queen behind the rooks, so that black queen has no queen d6 measure of defense, right? Because of if queen d6, then bishop c6. For example, if we played here queen d2, rook c1, right? Black just plays queen d6, and he is out of the dangerous waters. So rook d2 followed by queen d1, and there is a huge threat, as we can see here, rook d8, bishop g5, for example, or even g4, even knight g5, right? So again, this position extremely dangerous. Black queen is still tied up to this knight. For example, if queen goes to a5 somewhere, then we have queen g4 or queen h5. The computer shows queen g4 line, which is kind of unusual, because I don't see the immediate threat. Queen h5 would look normal, but of course bishop g5, black eliminates the knight, and though white keeps this hugely dangerous initiative, there's nothing concretely winning. However, according to the computer, queen g4 wins immediately, and I wonder what is the threat, because, for example, let's play knight e7, And then we see b4 response, followed by queen a3, then knight e4. So 95 is impossible because of rook c8. There is a huge threat of knight f6 check. Bishop e5 is forced, and then simply bishop d3, and white is playing basically on the outside queen on a3. So the plus 4.90 is absolutely winning. Black is playing with his queen far away and locked out of the game. And judging by this line, we see that the white is simply winning material here. Black is unable to protect all his rooks and minor pieces with the queen being on a3. So again, a very series of very accurate moves are required from white to use his advantage to a great effect. Okay. So d5 was a very dangerous thing that black allowed. Instead, what happened in the game, Zukertort played rook e d1, and he was hoping that Steinitz would allow him to play d5, probably in a much stronger position. But what happened is, of course, Steinitz plays knight a5, and he decides to get rid of this very dangerous bishop on b3, kick him out of this diagonal, prevents d5 with the tempo, and of course, white doesn't want to give up his bishop, even though computer says d5 probably is a good idea, but after d5, knight b3, the game would be very close to be a draw, and Zukertort, being behind in the match, he needs to find a way to complicate matters. So bishop c2. The game goes on, he needs to keep the pieces on the board to go for an attack. So, knight c4. The modern grandmasters, of course, would play b4 almost automatically, because knight has to go. Knight on c3 was very well placed. Knight a4. If knight e4, then knight d5. That's right. And bishop e5. More or less forcing white to exchange his pride in the position, the light squared bishop. And without the light squared bishop, there is no attack. Even though all those pieces look all white pieces look pretty dangerously close to the black king, there is no attack because knights have no real squares to enter. And black sort of wants to take the only open line here on the board, which is a c file. And again, after b3, for example, knight b7, knight seems to be lousy here, but he takes control with c5 square and d6 square, and potentially he can hope to d8 and f7 to aid in the defense of black king. So without light squared bishops, this position loses a lot of attacking potential for white, so he can allow that, but after knight a4 and queen b5, and white is forced to exchange the queens. Maybe, just maybe, white was afraid of the tactical trick here, but I mean, maybe black was afraid of this tactical trick. However, the knight on a8 will be stranded after knight d5, and black is winning another minor piece, either knight on a8 or bishop on f4, because bishop c6 is a huge threat, right? So rook c1, for example, rook c1, knight f4, bishop f8, successful defense, and black has two minor pieces for rook, which is a huge advantage. The only question whether black can win this, but obviously this is not what white wanted to get. So I'm very surprised that Steinitz didn't play b4. He probably decided to demonstrate that his knight on c4 is powerfully placed, but this knight closes his own rook on c file, takes away a bite out of that rook pin on white's bishop on c2, and allows white to play bishop d3, getting that bishop in the game. So going back, remember in the position where we had something like this, right, b5, and then Zukertort decided to play bishop b3, because if bishop d3, the knight goes here on b4 and then to d5 with the tempo, right? So instead what happened here is that we got basically the same bishop on d3, but black's knight is now on c4, and the knight on c4 is the double-edged thing. It sort of attacks white's pawn on b2, making sure that white pieces, some of them are stuck defending the pawn. However, and also the knight on c4, of course, is able to potentially exchange any of the white's knights coming to e5. But then again, the knight on c4 also, you know, he's kind of pinned. And what is his future? I mean, his future is to go to d6 mainly. So that's what's been played in the game. Black plays knight d6, and of course bishop c6 would look very natural. You know, moving the bishop to the long diagonal, which is the ideal place for the bishop. Black was probably concerned about knight e5, but in this position, after all the massive exchange, even white pair of bishops is probably not enough to break through defenses of the black king on the king side. It kind of looks dangerous, but there is not really much that white can do here, because h4, h5 doesn't have to be h5, but why not? And here, just probably even grabbing this thing here, followed by king g8. The black's bishop on d5 too powerful. White rooks, I don't think they'll be able to get to join the attack here, because any g4 moves here. Although it is possible, right? But again, the rook on c7 is well placed. So rook f8. If you exchange here, then black rooks joins the 7th rank, right? And if you play queen f6, then some tactical stuff with g3. So what else white can do? Queen f6 probably the best move, because of h6, then king h7, and rook g8. There is no attack. Rook d7, queen d8 is coming. So black has enough defensive resources here. But okay, knight d6. Black wants to keep the option of playing knight f5, which I can understand. So knight e5, bishop e8, and now we have bishop g5. a3 would be, again, very modern move. Basically, probably met by a5, followed by queen f3, rook b8 is probably not accurate. b4, taking, followed by rook a2. And again, the computer says the position is pretty balanced. I would probably agree here that because of that knight on d6, it's just not that great knight. Should be perfectly placed on d5. Still probably somewhat better for black, because he opened the queen side. Potentially pawn on b2 is a target for the rooks. Okay, so bishop e8, bishop g5. Now we have h6. Some commentators mention moves like rook a7, rook c7. Those are okay. The game weight went queen d8, but I think h6 was probably more accurate. It asks white bishop on g5 the question, you're gonna go back to f4, take on f6, or go to h4? Because with bishop h4, then there is such thing as, again, bishop e5 exchanging the light squared bishop, followed by queen d5, and knight on f5, and bishop on g3 is doing nothing. And whilst black king is slightly weakened by this h6 g5, there is no way for white to use it to his advantage, as his only active piece is on e5, and black has a lot of gray squares for his minor pieces, and queen is wonderfully centralized. Just don't see any attack here, so h6 was reasonable, and obviously if white gives up such a bishop, there is no hope for an attack here at all. Bishop on e8, bishop on f6, followed by g6, just give black clear advantage. So the game happened queen d8. Black is sort of following systematically his plan of just demonstrating to white that he has no attack. He can just passively create the sort of wall of his pieces in the center. So let's see what happened further. Queen f3, queen goes to h3, rook on a7, very logical. Rook preparing to double on the 7th and go to the c7, queen h3. White probes the king side, trying to create some targets by weakening a black pawn structure there. And g6 would be a pretty modern way of playing this position. However, in the game, g6 by blocking white's attacking bishop on d3, not scaring of creating these holes, the dark squares, because those are difficult to use. In the game, what happened was h6, bishop a3, rook c7, and d5. That was a tactical alertness, because rook c7 creates the possibility for white to create a threat of bishop b6, right, winning the exchange. So d5 was an interesting move. I would say that a3 first may be more plausible, because playing a5 and d5, and now after b4, for example, take, white's rook on a1 is able to join the game. It opens the A file. So usually those inclusions of a3, e5 are good. However, Zukertort probably didn't like knight c4, even though in this particular position now the doubling of black rooks on the c line doesn't look that great. And you can play d5 now, right? But then again, the exchange sacrifice here offered by the computer looks pretty strong to me. Black clearly has compensation for this exchange. Knight cannot go because of pawn b2 is hanging, right? And black gets pair of bishops, strong central pawns. If he can get the pawn to d3, then bishop somewhere to b5 to a4, black is fine. So probably somewhere equal after queen c3, protecting the knight, denying this d5, d4 trick. So queen d6, rook e1, rook e1, and then rook e7, maybe just simple bishop d7 followed by bishop e6, right? So that makes a lot of sense. So the position, this is the sort of position where only black can play for a win. The bishops are powerful, they connect, especially the bishop on a6 now, he connects this entire row of pawns. And white cannot get to it, while white has to deal with the pins, especially this pin, right? And then the pawn on b2 also is weak. So black has plenty of defensive resources, so let's see what happened in the game. d5, if knight takes, then just bishop b6 wins the exchange, so b4 has to be played, and Zukertort just plays knight e2. He gives up the pawn. The computer shows that this line is possible, because rook c3, then take, bishop a6. But what happens here is that white is forced to go to the endgame, which is basically even. With the presence of rooks on board, it's even. If there were no rooks on board, then white will have very serious chances to win, because the minor pieces are not that great in dealing, especially with the a pass pawn, and with the rook, which can cut off black king along any line, c, b, d line. At the same time, white has a second pass potential pawn on the king side here. So Zukertort plays knight e2, knight d5, makes sense, right? Bishop a6 first, although he has to get some measure of pawn back, so he gets the pawn back. And of course, bishop f6 is not the move that the modern GM would play. Modern GM would immediately grab this bishop to get himself a pair of bishops and also deny white any attacking possibility here, followed by rook a5 and queen b8 or queen a8. For example, if knight h5, f4, and then black superior pawn structure in the center combined with active rooks and powerful bishops leaves white with the huge disadvantage. So bishop d3, bishop f6 was a strange move, therefore, because white immediately, of course, plays bishop d4, saves his bishop, and knight b5. So that was black's idea. He wanted to exchange the light-squared bishop. He was fearing of this open diagonal on the king, and probably Steinitz wanted to force white to give up his light-squared bishop instead of the dark-squared bishop. So let's see what happened. In the game happened knight f3. It seems that Zukertort agreed with that idea, although I think that white's d4 bishop is probably better, because he actually can potentially control a lot of squares. Also, knight h5 is coming, right? White wants to hit this bishop on f6. And b3 is a very accurate move. The idea is if white plays a3, then rook a4 wins immediately. Bishop on t4 is stuck. However, I'm pretty sure that Zukertort didn't take this move into consideration, this computer move, first line. White gives up a pawn but keeps the bishop here. And now either knight e4 or queen h5 and queen g4 with the idea of knight h5. And black is sort of forced hugely on the defensive here. So I would say that in a modern game, this would be more more scary for black, right? Because his pieces become passive, right? The knights are very active, and this bishop creates a lot of threats. So I would say that this was a good idea for white to try. In the game, what happened was he played knight f3. Of course, black took the bishop finally. Rook a5. That's okay. Queen is prepared to go to leaving the 8a square for the queen, right, to get away from all these pins along the d file. Then we have queen a3, bishop a4, attacking the rook, provoking white into playing b3, in which case the bishop goes back, and of course this queen on c3 is absolutely fantastic for black pieces. So Zukertort plays rook e1, knight e7, queen e4, g6, b3, and now we come to the critical position of the game, bishop c4. White prepares the sacrifice on e6, and he goes and sacrifices it, because of rook d1, then rook d7, black just wins the piece, right? So knight e6, now we enter the tactical complications finally, and even though in previous games we saw that in the beginning we saw that Steinitz was missing some tactics, but however, in the closer to the middle of the match, we saw that Zukertort was starting to blunder more often. And now we see this curious position. Well, according to the computer, black is completely winning. Nevertheless, the human would consider playing queen e7 here, delaying the capture of the knight, because knight cannot move. Black changes the queens and takes the rook. So white has to play something like knight d4 or knight f4. So if knight f4, the easiest thing for black to do, of course, is to get rid of this attacking bishop and just grab this rook, and black is simply piece up, winning position. And if the knight goes to d4, now you can take on e6 and bishop f5, and black still has piece up, right? So that was not such an easy line to calculate. F e6 was played in the game because of queen e6 and bishop f7, so bishop takes. Again, a modern grandmaster would probably calculate bishop f7, realize that he is very close to winning, as here black can just basically take on e6, and there is no more attack for white. He keeps the extra piece. However, Steinitz plays queen e7, knight f4, and he really counted on this move. He thought that after this move he's completely winning. But there is queen b1, and suddenly it's not so clear, because the threat is to take on e5, take on g6, or take on g6 first, take on e5, to take on f5. So Steinitz a little bit panics. He takes on e1, and that is a huge inaccuracy. He has to play something like bishop d7. The earlier commentators recommended bishop c6, which is also not bad, but I kind of like bishop d7. I like to exchange active pieces, and after this forced exchange operation, black has 3 minor pieces for rook and 3 pawns. Huge material advantage for black, which is a winning game, of course. So that would be expected. So, but Steinitz plays rook e1. I think he panics at this point, because after rook e1, suddenly black is no better anymore, because there is a huge threat of knight d5, and there is a huge threat of bishop f5. And what he played bishop c3. Probably the same thing would be with knight d4, but I think Steinitz wanted to, for example, bishop c4 would get close to the game position. I thought that Steinitz wanted to put the bishop on c3 first, sort of restrict white pieces, so we get the same thing: knight c7, queen c7, rook d1, and knight d4. So Steinitz thinks that having all these centralized pieces would help him contain white's threats against his slightly open king. However, it's not so simple, because what white does, he of course improves his queen. Now any potential threats to the white king are nullified. The bishop on c3 is doing defensive role. However, there is still a queen e3 coming. So bishop a8 is an accuracy, after which black's position becomes worse. Black had to play something like queen e5 and queen e4 and exchange queens in this particular way. In this way, pawn on b4 holds white's 2 pawns on the queen side, and black is okay because it is probably impossible for white to use his 3 versus 2 majority pawn side on the king side. However, what happened in the game was bishop a8, and after queen e3 suddenly white is better. Queen on a3 serves a lot of functions. It hits that e file, those squares on e5 and a7, you know, mating threats, plus the knight on d4, of course, is under attack, and the final point is that there is such thing as a3, right? Undermining this whole support system for black's bishop on c3. So immediately you can see the valuation jump, and black is just in a serious danger now. I think Steinitz really counted on that queen b7 or queen c6 threat, but Zukertort called a shot and he said, I call your bet. And Zukertort was known for his gaming, right? He played the great whist professionally, and so he was a card player, so he knew the bluff when he saw one. And he called Steinitz on it, and Steinitz plays queen d6, but after a3, fantastic move by the 18th century World Championship contender. Zukertort is simply fantastic. The whole concept, you know, he just breaks through black's minor piece blockade, and white is now winning because he has 3 pawns. Black pieces on bishop c3, knight d4 are no longer that comfortable. And now he plays slight inaccurate, he plays king f1, whereas if he played b5, he would be winning because that pawn is taboo. Because of queen c5, rook d6, and the only way for black to keep his bishop c3 protected by playing queen e5, but then of course you have exchange and rook e6 winning the bishop. So that would have won the game much faster for white, but we will not be shown Zukertort mastery in the coming endgame. So let's see that. King f1. The idea of king f1 is that you cannot take on c3 because knight e2 tactical defense, right? So king f1 first. So black plays knight b5, and now we play. Now Zukertort plays queen e6. I think it's a great move, great practical choice. Black is forced to exchange the queens, and there is the threat of bishop d7 coming. And Steinitz goes for the pawn, but allows the bishop exchange, after which white is basically having rook and 2 pawns versus bishop and knight. So this is an extremely difficult endgame for black to defend, because the 3 versus 2 pawns obviously generate the potential pass pawn for white, and also the b pawn together with the rook pawn, they are far enough for black king to go, because that leaves his kingside pawns vulnerable. So black is stuck trying to create a sort of defense where his minor pieces and king will coordinate in such a way as they can jump to either kingside or queenside at a moment's notice. But it's not so simple, and we'll see how Zukertort slowly outplays his opponent here. First of all, that pawn comes. Rook c6. White is absolutely happy to exchange his b pawn for a g pawn, because that leaves 3 versus 1, allowing white to create pass pawns which are coming forward. So bishop d6, rook b6, knight d4. Knight c3 was probably more accurate, but still doesn't guarantee easy life for black. So rook d7, b5. White deflects black king to the center, to the queen side. And finally, we reach this position which white was hoping for. I absolutely like h4 move here. Immediately break this pawn chain, clarify the situation, and does not allow black potentially to play bishop e7 and break apart white's pawns. Right, that's the threat. Because if you have f and h pawns and plus rook versus 2 minor pieces, it's very likely to be a draw. Which is why Zukertort plays h4 correctly, and he goes on to the endgame. And now Steinitz makes a mistake. He plays knight f5. I mean, not such a bad mistake. I mean, knight e6 should have been played before, but now he plays knight e7, very passive, and that is a losing move, I believe. So the idea is he should have played knight d4 and tried to keep white's pawns from reaching f4, g5 squares, because of knight e6, suddenly it's not so easy for white to get the g5 pawn moving or f4 pawn moving, and also keep centralizing the king without allowing black kings to enter the game as well by keeping his rook on the 7. Because, again, the rook on h7 has limited squares. For example, if rook goes here, and king f3 trying to play king e4, right? If the king comes to e4, f5, d5, breaks black minor piece coordination. However, knight g5 check, you don't have king e3, right? Because of bishop e5, so king e2, king f8, now the rook goes to b7, white is ready to play king e3, knight e6, and now check. King e4, king e3 is impossible because of knight c5, so you play king e3, and then the bishop goes back to c7, king e4, again, still impossible because of knight c5, so you have to play rook here, but that means black king gets to f6, and white cannot play f4 because black just gives up his 2 minor pieces for the pawn, and with the king already very close on f6, it's a drawn pawn endgame. So this is absolutely fantastic endgame. I was absolutely amazed the way Zukertort played it. And Steinitz made a mistake with the knight e7. It seems that the knight can go to d5 and hit the pawn on f4, but after king g2, king f3, the king gets to e4 unchallenged, and that basically king g3, very accurate move, and f4, and now the game is lost. You see the valuation jump from 1 point something to 2.52. So basically it says that anything below 2 point advantage is probably drawn for black, but anything above 2 points is already very close to, I would say it's lost game. And black pieces are unable to successfully protect against the coming g5, f5, f6, king h5 thing. So let's see how Zukertort completed his mission, converting his advantage, and g5, correct. And king simply walks to h5 now. Again, improving his position slowly, improving his rook, pawns are there. King h5, great job. King goes to h7, where he will help white's pawns to queen. King h6, king h7, and g6, and black resigns. An incredible performance by Zukertort, especially in the endgame part. He was looking for the chances. He took a lot of risks in the middle game. Steinitz, although he missed d4, d5 break, right, in the middle game, we saw that. But after that, he played really imaginatively, and Steinitz had his chances. He played rook e5, he miscalculated, he was hoping that rook e5 will save him. After that, Zukertort sacrificed the knight on e6, but he miscalculated, and then he panicked, and then he misjudged white's queen coming to e3. That was the key square. He could have transposed the endgame by playing queen e4 and not allowing white to break through with a3, but after that, basically, it was a very hard defense for Steinitz, and I'm sure he was pretty upset about his early play, where he had a huge advantage and now he had to fight for an equality. That is something very difficult for a lot of players to cope with. It can be very frustrating, especially psychologically, right? You felt you had this great position and you mess it up, and it's just like can't help but feeling like frustrated. And that is a really bad mindset, because it ruins your quality of the game for the current stage, right? You have to be cool. You have to stay cool, and you have to keep playing and keep looking for those chances, and you have to be accurate, because your opponent, on the contrary, he is inspired because he sees that you made a mistake, right? So he can try to capitalize on it. So he's punching on every little inaccurate move that you make. So you have to be doubly careful when you're in that sort of situation. So that was the game 13 of the Zukertort Steinitz World Championship match. This was the last game of the match that Zukertort won. After this, it went all downhill. I mean, at this point, he's only -1, so he had to win the game to keep the score tight. But as we will see later in our next games of the match, he did not manage to do it, and Steinitz became the world champion. So stay tuned for the next development, and I'll see you guys soon.